Viva La Evolucion. Of course, when I selected this sort of title for the presentation, I was sort of thinking about doing something around sort of evolving from the Viva La Revolution, of course. And the first thing I did when I came up with this title was probably, well, this is not a Banksy, by the way. You have to remember this. I added this. This is not a Banksy, but it's endless. It's actually one example of someone taking the famous Banksy sort of piece where he has the guy throwing the flowers, the protesters throwing the flowers, but he has exchanged it for a Coke bottle instead. So it's a little bit different. It's sort of he is evolving or sort of building upon what Banks have been doing and creating his own version of it. But first thing I did, I Googled, and I did Google image search, as probably a lot of people do. And the only thing that came up was a lot of monkey faces on the Che Guevara picture. You see, there is a common theme in all these pictures. And that got me thinking, where am I going with, what am I going to do with this? And then I remembered that, actually I've seen this before. This is sort of a streetwear brand called SSUR, which have been using this since 1989. This is called Rebel Ape. So they have mashed up the famous picture of Che Guevara with one of the apes from Planet of the Apes in order to create what called the Rebel Ape. So this is an example of how you create something from something new from something old, and combining those into something almost like an evolution of what we're doing, or a remix, or mashup, whatever we call it. And the ape theme is kind of, I mean, it's available everywhere when it comes to streetwear. You have these kind of companies. They're all using apes in their sort of, on T-shirts and on clothes and so on, and on the logos. So it's kind of something that you have seen a lot of times before. And who did what first and who copied who is a question. You can read long discussions around it on Reddit, for instance, or different types of streetwear forums. One thing is for sure is that Bathing Ape is probably the last one. Nego sort of based his work upon other people's work, but anyhow, it's kind of available everywhere. So I would say this is sort of an example of a remix of something. When you do create something out of something else. And maybe you have seen the documentary, Everything is a Remix, which came like 4 or 5 years ago. And there's been a lot of talking about the remix culture, that we build upon other things. Everything we do, build upon other people's work in order to create new stuff. And the term remix, of course, comes from music. Creating a new version of a song based upon, well, to show, to make it different or give your flavor to the song. And I want to show you a little bit about evolution when it comes to music. How many of you guys know the Winstons' Amen Brother? One. This song came in 1969. It's a B-side of a single. And it contains 6 seconds of a very, very funky drum break. Extremely good. And this drum break is probably the most important drum break in the history of music. Because a lot of things has been based upon this. If you look at, for instance, an artist like Aphex Twin. Have you heard Come to Daddy? Yeah, very, very strange song in all senses. I mean, it's part of what you call it. I think that the term people have coined the sort of style of it is breakcore, which is like a mixture between breakbeat and hardcore. Kind of a rough, hard song. And a very, very strange video if you look it up on YouTube. But the thing is, he uses the sample, the 6-second sample, all throughout this song as a part of the drum track. But he didn't, of course, discover this himself. This is part of a long evolution before it reaches this point where he creates the Come to Daddy single. So if we start with the first one, in this Winston Brothers, the B-side of the single, was discovered by DJs and picked up by DJs in the early hip-hop movement in the US or in New York in mid-70s. And it was a part of like when hip hop got big. So this is NWA and Salt and Pepper. They all used a lot of the artists used this this sample to create the drum tracks for the as a basis for the songs. And then everything went over to Britain. They added reggae into the mix. So they had reggae bass lines and Jamaican MCs and toasting and whatever to actually create what we call jungle. And jungle went into drum and bass, which is a more like refined form of it, which turned out to be 100 different genres within a year, or probably something like that. Because in the dance music community, everything happens really fast. People come up with new styles all the time. And one is, after a couple of years, this is probably like 94 and 93 or 91. In 1997, the guy, Aphex Twin, very much influenced by these guys, created Come to Daddy. So you can see a progression of events happening here, from the original recording through the DJs in New York and hip hop, jungle, and then to Come to Daddy. So you see something that people are building upon other people's work and sort of trying out different styles and doing their own flavor of this. And even today, people use this sample. This is the Galantis record. Might have seen that. This came out a couple of months ago. They use it in that record. And if you look at the database at whosample.com, which tracks all the sampling songs and all the artists they're sampling, there are 1,800 songs registered at the moment at whosample.com. It's using the 6-second break. But I would probably imagine that there are like probably 10,000 more or something like that. It's a lot of songs that's based on this one. So this is So this is what we call evolution. Something happens over time, changes, and people build upon other people's work. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. So let us go back into time to 1994. In 1994, this was launched. This is the IBM Simon, the first smartphone. It had a kind of cool thing. So it was possible to like send fax on it. Who can do that today? Paging, email, a lot of things like that. It had a touch screen with an on-screen keyboard. You can also write on the screen with using a pen. So it's kind of an amazing piece of technology at the time. I think 50,000 of these were sold. So it wasn't a big product by today's measure. When we think about, like, the iPhone has probably been sold a couple of 100 million pieces. So it's kind of different, kind of small when it comes to that. But still, an amazing kit of technology. And over the years, people tried to build smartphones that appeal to users. And most of the smartphones appeal to mostly to business users. These are not exactly very sexy devices, if you think about it today. But and they're not very good. The user interfaces are not very good at all. They're kind of tricky to use them, hard to use them, not very intuitive, but very capable if you look at the features, but it's not for the end user. So it mostly appealed to business users. And I have to also mention this. This is Neonode. How many of you had a Neonode? No one, probably, because Neonode was a Swedish company that launched what I think is the first gesture-based phone. So it was using gestures on the screen. It had slide to unlock, like 2 years before Apple launched it in the iPhone. And actually, I saw it today that Apple lost a court case in Germany because of this. And slide to unlock. So they did this first. They used another technology for the touchscreen, but yeah, it was kind of invented at the time, and kind of cool. But nothing happened until 13 years later. And 13 years later, this was launched. Not exactly what you expected, probably, but this was actually launched in December 2006. I think it got a prize, Red Dot Design Award, in like October 2006. This is the LG Prada. You can see flat glass surface, or probably plastic in this case. All touchscreen, kind of a good-looking phone. I think it looks quite okay, actually. You had that? Yeah. But what did you think about the UI? Do you yeah. You don't remember that.
Much, but I really like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything, the design, the UI as well, I think. But of course, it cannot really compare to
Yeah. No.
the iPhone. And the
Cool.
But still, it's very nice.
You're the first one I met who actually had this phone, so I love that. And this phone, it actually has capacitive touch, the same kind of touch that is on our devices today. So you don't have to apply force to actually make it work. You can actually just use your finger on it without applying any force and touching it hard as you had to on all the previous devices. And it had all the components. Maybe a little bit processor was a little bit too slow. But the UI, I actually looked at videos of it. It looks kind of not very good. You expect some things today, like sliding, like swiping and stuff like that. Nothing like that was available on this one. So. But of course, I'm talking about this one, iPhone. The iPhone was, at a time, I mean, when it came out, it changed the industry total. Nobody was doing anything like this. But if you look at the different components of this phone, like if you look at like multi-touch was invented in 1984. It wasn't a very new sort of invention. 23 years after it was invented, it was used on the phone. It was mainly used for music instruments at the time. Pins to zoom, which was one of the things that people sort of got very excited about, was first shown in 1988, 19 years before the launch on the phone. And actually, a lot of companies showed the pinch to zoom gesture, like Sun Microsystems, and a company actually also presented it in 1998. That company was bought by Apple, and they used their knowledge to create this phone, create sort of the touchscreen parts of this phone. And most of the things they added to this phone were things that were available on the open market. All the technology, the glass that they could buy from Corning, their camera was of course available from any camera maker out there, and the processor was an ARM processor which you can buy off the shelf almost. But they created a great package out of all these components that they brought together. And also, you might think that they created out of this, they sat in a room and came up with this. Of course they didn't. They knew exactly what their competition was doing at the time. They didn't come up with this without knowing what everybody else was doing. They knew exactly what the problem was with their competitors, what they were doing right, and what they were doing wrong. And that's why they were able to create something that beat them. So they actually put a lot of work into this to make it work. So let's go back again. 1995 to the Timex Datalink, the first real wearable. Actually, it's kind of cool. This is the second version of it, but it's kind of a cool product. It had, you could sync it to your computer and show, so you can have all your appointments and all your contacts. And I think you can actually hold it up against the speaker of a phone to make a phone call. Kind of a cool feature that nobody else is using nowadays. But the really cool thing about this was that at the time it wasn't possible to use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or anything because it wasn't invented yet or not available on the open market. So instead of to sync this, you used to hold it up against your big thick monitor. And the monitor was flickering all the time, and then you could sync your phone by light, sync your watch by light. It's kind of a cool solution for a very tricky problem at the time. And actually, I think this one went to space, actually. If you read the Wikipedia article, they sent it up on one of the space shuttles, but it doesn't matter. And over the years, people tried to create smartwatches, like LG again, with the Prada watch. They tried to create something. And this could show like messages and who was calling and stuff like that. But it wasn't really that smart. And they tried to create like a phone watch you can make phone calls on. Nobody bought them, of course, but because who wants to be like what's it called? The famous cartoon character which talks on your phone, like Dick Tracy. Yeah, that's right. You don't want to be like that. It's just stupid standing there talking like this in your phone. And a lot of Chinese companies, if you look at around on Chinese gadget site, you can find a lot of strange variants of smartphones which sort of just do this, nothing more. But what's happening now, 20 years later? I mean, the whole wearables community is starting to happen. We're talking about like Apple launching the Apple Watch, which Pierre has on his arm and sort of not. Google has launched Android Wear, which the thing with these ones are that they're actually targeted against ordinary consumers, not just geeks. They're trying to make this available for other people, for a lot of like ordinary people, to the general public. And all the kind of Fitbit and all the kind of activity armbands we have, wristbands we have at the moment is also something like this. That it started to get available to the general public and appealing enough for the general public. But it took 19 years to actually get here. Again, 1995, everything happened in the mid-90s. You can see that. This one, I love this picture. This was the future in 1995. Everybody was thinking about VR. Yeah, cool stuff. But, I mean, if you look at this, it wasn't really, if you actually experienced one of these, you could see that it wasn't really good. It was kind of a bad experience. Bad graphics, slow, not very usable at all, and not very expensive, and not very appealing to anyone. It's just a couple of like special sort of purposes for this. And people try to do things with this. Like this is the 3D gaming console that Nintendo tried to launch. And I saw a list of the like 10 worst gaming consoles in the world ever. This was on that list. Nintendo has done a lot of cool stuff, but this one is probably not one of them. But they tried to do that. But if you think about, I mean, at least they tried, but it wasn't any interest in the general public. The idea about VR is kind of old. This is from 1962, it says. It's kind of file 1961. This is a patent of a VR equipment that someone thought, I think, if you look at it, actually it's kind of interesting. I think you can control it somehow here. And there is some kind of vibration on the chair. And then you have some kind of 3D audio coming around your head or whatever. And I'm not sure actually if this actually got built or anything, but I mean, the idea of this is quite kind of old. And if you look at the stereoscopic effects of the VR glasses or VR experience we have, this one as well. You might remember this from when you were kids. This is the Viewmaster, a beige one. I only seen like red ones before, but. Here you have those discs with photos and you got stereoscopic sort of images. Kind of cool thing. Back in 1960, whatever. But the idea is far much older than this. This has been stereoscopic things since the beginning of the 20th century. So it's kind of an old thing. But 20 years after, the guys who tried out these sort of first VR experiment, or tried to make something the future in 1995. We're thinking about this. This is kind of hard to see. This is the Oculus Rift, the company that Facebook bought for $2 billion in order to create some kind of 3D world or whatever they're creating. Nobody knows. But they're launching this one for the general public in 2016. Their development kit has been out for a couple of years, and people have been building stuff on this. I think this one, of course, is first one who's going to be actually be buyable by people, but I think it's still very much going to be a niche product because it's still, I mean, if this costs like 2,000, 3,000 kroners, who's going to buy that? Well, a small percentage of the world. Everybody else is probably not going to bother. They don't want to have another device that costs these kind of money in their house. But still, things are happening here. It took 20 years to get here. Google Cardboard, on the other hand, is the other end of the spectrum. Of course not. The experience is nowhere near what you will have in when using Oculus Rift. But the Google Cardboard is very cheap. I mean, you can buy it from China for less than 20 crowns. You can buy it and use your mobile phone as a display. Or you can buy it at Clas Ohlson. I think a couple of weeks you had it one for 50 crowns. So it doesn't cost anything almost. You can just plug in your phone and play around with like a very, very easy or simple way of virtual reality. I think this is much more interesting for the general public to pay that amount of money than buying something new. And it's also shown that they're trying to build, after 20 years, they come from special equipment, creating something very cheap instead that sort of makes it possible to spread this technology to the world. And this is actually a new Viewmaster. This is Google Cardboard as well. So this is actually a licensed Google Cardboard Viewmaster for 2015. So people are trying to build stuff on this and trying to make this sort of reachable, available to the general public. This is examples of what Bill Buxton works at Microsoft. He's like one of the top researchers, a legend among interaction designers in the world, and especially when it comes to touch interfaces. He called this a long nose of innovation. It's been proven time after time that things take quite a long time to actually get traction to the general public, that people start buying this and turning into a big industry. He's talking about 15 to 20 years. And people are, of course, trying to reduce that time nowadays, but 15 to 20 years. And there are numerous examples. I mentioned the multi-touch things, and mentioned pinch to zoom. Another example is the computer mouse. I think it was invented in 1968, and the guy who invented it didn't bother filing for a patent. So some other guys at Xerox PARC filed a patent in 1972 and sort of stole the idea. But in 1984 was the first time it actually made sense for the general public to use a mouse, when the Apple Macintosh was released, the first one. But it wasn't really until 1995, when Windows 95 was released, that people actually started using the computer mouse in general, like the broad market. Everybody started using it. So it took quite a long time to get it up and get it into this multi-dollar industry. This is what long nose of innovation. So, 3 examples of evolution. But there is always a danger with evolution. I mean, if we work in the design field and want to create stuff, and we look at what all the competitors are doing, and everybody else is doing, and trying to build upon that, and there's always a risk that we will sort of be accused of being copycats. We don't want to be copycats. No one will want to be that. But what is a copycat? Well, I see a copycat as something who's copying everything sort of precisely and exactly. But if you're inspired by someone, are you really a copycat then? Like when I did some research for this, I found this quote from one of the guys who's one of the executives at Rocket Internet. How many of you guys know Rocket Internet? Okay, so the Rocket Internet is a copy factory, they call it, down in Berlin. They create the same website. They create sort of copies of American successful websites. And they've done a lot of copies of American websites and launched them in other parts of the world. And actually, I think they're always accused of being copycats that never have any original ideas. But the fact is, I like this quote. I like the fact that but look at the local baker shop. The guy who's running that did an event making bread. In some of the cases, they're accusing them of stealing things. Like in the case of Zalando, where they said that they took it from Zappos. I mean, Zappos is just e-commerce site in my eyes. They had a very smart idea about free returns of the shoes you bought, but it's just some kind of e-commerce site. They're doing this on a regular basis. They do things like this and sort of steals ideas and build upon them and create new things. And if you look at what the mission is, this is really good, because they've become the world's largest internet platform outside United States and China. So if you have like an e-commerce site in, say, California or US, you have great, probably, infrastructure, everything is working according to payments and everything like that. And then you try to launch that, let's say, in Egypt or in Pakistan. You have much bigger challenges when it comes to things like, for instance, infrastructure, or maybe payment systems as well. I don't know exactly what the challenges are in those countries. But you need to adapt to those countries and those cultures in order to succeed there. You cannot just take this industry or this e-commerce site and move that to another country and hope everything goes well, because there are challenges and cultural differences around the world. And this is what they're doing. They're actually creating copies. I do that with quotes, because I think they're adding some stuff in order to actually make the services work outside of the US. So they're not just copying, they're adding stuff and building upon other people's work to create new services and new sites and new businesses, which is kind of tough. A couple of weeks ago, this was actually written in a Swedish site, Break It. This guy, he applied for 300 jobs in 4 months. Now he's leading the Nigerian version of Blocket. I think it's sort of, I don't like the fact that they're saying that he's leading like a Nigerian version of Blocket. I mean, he's creating an e-commerce site in Nigeria. Of course, there are similarities to Blocket, but I don't remember Blocket having 30 motorcyclists hired to go out to the resellers, the sellers, and take photos of them and their photo IDs in order to gain trust, so people can trust the sellers. This is something he had to add because of the way Nigeria works. It works very differently from Sweden. I mean, it's super smart to come up with something like this. And sort of almost downplay that to say that, yeah, he created the Nigerian version of Blocket. I mean, he's creating something new, something really inventive, really smart. He's taking the idea of a marketplace like Blocket to another part of the world. But hey, doing smart things. And this is actually based upon, the company who's launched this site is called Saltside. It's a Gothenburg company. And also here, they also have their mission on their homepage like this. And our mission is to build leading online marketplaces in underserved markets, creating sustainable value for the community. So they're trying. They're actually adding knowledge about how things work in Sweden, and then moving that to other parts of the world and creating new stuff. I think it's very good, very interesting to see that like that, instead of just seeing them as copycats. So let's go into Xiaomi. Pronounced right? Xiaomi, how many of you guys know Xiaomi? Well, a couple of you, good. You should know them. You have to know them. They're the 4th largest phone brand in the world. Largest in China, 2nd smartest company according to MIT Technology Review in 2015, their ranking, and 3rd most innovative company in Fast Company 2014. What's so innovative with this company? Well, first of all, it's a business model. They work with like very thin margins, extremely thin margins, and they have smart marketing idea how to handle marketing. They have a very, very vibrant community around the devices. If you go into look at their development or the user forums, you can see that there is a lot of discussions around how to improve the phones, and they're listening all the time. They're releasing developer builds to the public for the phones, like once every week or once every 2 weeks, for everyone to download if they want to. What other phone company in the world does that? It's kind of amazing. So they do things differently, and they create actually really good products based on, on great prices, and it's very successful, as you can see here. This is how their website looks like. It sort of reminds me of someone else's website, especially the colors, right? Yeah, it's sort of an Apple thing, of course. They have this Apple complex. A couple of years ago, their CEO ended one of their keynotes with a huge sentence at the back of on the screen saying, "One more thing." Exactly the same thing as Steve Jobs used. So they have an Apple complex. Nobody can deny that. But still, if you look at their products, it's kind of different. It's different. It works differently. There are distinctive design language if you look at it in detail. But still, I mean, they don't have. What am I going to say? Yeah. So, but there is a copy. They are still sort of regarded as copycats in the Western world, in the West world. But I think they're doing some great things, and they're doing some things different, and they're bringing good devices at low prices to parts of the world outside, maybe even outside China, in like Indonesia and Philippines and India. So this is an interesting company, and you should not say that they're just copycats, because when they design headphones, they get Red Dot awards. They're onto something. They're actually doing great things when it comes to design. They're improving. They're getting away from the copycat sort of trademark and becoming something else. So it might be that they started out as someone who was a lot of inspired by what Apple did, and then started to create something else. And now they're doing original work as well. It's almost like, you remember, I mean, back in the 70s, Japanese cars was regarded like crap. I mean, nobody bought Japanese cars. The quality was bad. It was just bad copies of small cars and bad copies of what people are doing in Europe. But nowadays, nobody thinks about them that way. The same goes with Korean cars. They also like managed to get from someone who did something, maybe copies of cars from Europe or Japan in that case, to actually become really good car companies. So this is part of sort of evolution of different companies. So that brings us into competitors. And these all companies have looking at competitors, of course. I mean, Xiaomi has been looking at Apple, and the other guys have been looking at probably everybody else is doing in different countries. But these competitors, how should you treat competitors? I saw one thing on the Google Ventures website, which I think is a great quote that I think you should bring with you tonight. Think of them as free functional prototypes. If you're doing some development, if you're doing something, do user testing on your competitors, your potential competitors. Understand what they're doing wrong and try to fix what they're doing wrong. Do things better. Understand what they're doing in order to create your product that's going to blow everyone's mind away. So, Bourbon. Anybody heard of them? Instagram. Yeah, that's true. It was this kind of app which had everything. Check-ins, future check-ins, photo sharing. You could there was a kind of achievement system and friends list and everything. It did everything that in one product. That it didn't work at all. So they sat down and saw what actually was working, and that was the photo sharing, and saw the gap between Hipstamatic, which was a cool thing at the time, which sucked at sharing photos. But then you had Facebook, which sucked at they had this great iPhone app, but it also sucked at sharing photos. So they saw a gap there. Nice looking photos, bad sharing. No great sort of sharing features, but no actually good photo sharing features. So they saw a gap and created Instagram. And I think it's interesting that they sort of did what we'd call a pivot. So they changed the way of doing business based upon that they saw that it didn't work. And this is also evolution. I mean, if you see something or see that something works in your product, you can focus on that and try to sort of remove all things that doesn't work and focus on one thing. Or maybe change the company's way around, what you're doing. For instance, YouTube started as a dating service. You might not know that, but I mean, the first thing they thought about was that you could upload your personal sort of video presentation to YouTube, and sort of people should sort of find you somehow because it didn't work that way, that good. They actually paid girls to upload their videos to YouTube, and nobody did. So, well. It didn't work. But then people started uploading things like videos of their cats and stuff like that. And they saw, maybe we have something here. maybe this is what we should do. So they pivoted the company to create something else. They're creating a video service instead. And you can say the rest is history. Audio, anyone know that? Audio used to be a podcast management tool or subscription tool. Then a certain company called Apple introduced podcast support in iTunes. And then they had to sort of do something because they wanted to survive. So they had 2 weeks actually to create something. And they created a company called Twitter, which is rather successful. And Twitter wasn't actually a new thing. Microblogging was available. Jaiku, remember those? Finnish company. Nobody outside probably Europe used them because it's kind of interesting as a side point that actually quite limited number of European services and sites has been successful in the US. I think there are 2 or 3 of them, nothing more. Most of the successful sites in the US are American. But anyhow, rest is history. And this was game never ending. Some kind of online game, which happened to have a photo sharing feature as well, which was probably the only thing that worked. And they sort of did a bit of pivot and became Flickr. So they scrapped the whole gaming experience and created a photo sharing site. So this, 3 examples of what can happen if you think about what you're doing and doing something else and build upon what you're doing and see what's working. So check your analytics and see what you're doing, what people are using on your site. But all these guys I've been talking about, all these things I've been showing, everybody's sort of always innovating through looking at other people. They know exactly what's happening around you. Whether it's Apple, they know exactly what people are doing around them, even though they're regarded as one of the most innovative companies in the world. And like Instagram, they changed the way of doing business. And a lot of these companies and artists and everyone has sort of evolved from something or built upon other people's work. I want to end this by, actually saw this. Do you know Don Orman, writer of Design of Everyday Things? He was interviewed a couple of weeks ago on an Australian website, and I think it's sort of his question. And the answer he got for this question was kind of interesting. Shouldn't companies like Nest be coming out with something really innovative and different? And his answer was this. Well, that's overrated. The number of completely different innovative things that have changed over your life is remarkably low. That's what every designer wants to do. When we teach design courses in the universities, every student wants to revolutionize life, but how many revolutions have you actually lived through in your life? I can't think of a number, but it's not that many. You have the smartphone revolution, internet, a couple of more. But in general, it's not many that sort of changes your behavior. In the case of Instagram, it changed your behavior when it came over time because people started using Instagram photos in a different way than it used before. Nowadays, people tend to share photos more than actually keep them in their personal connection. It's sort of a way of showing what you do. So maybe they did that, but it wasn't like immediate. It's something that happened over years when people started using it. So I would say that evolution leads to revolution. In the case of Instagram, it clearly did, because people started using photos in another way. But it takes, there you go. But it happens in small steps. A lot of things happen in small steps. We don't even notice them. We expect something big to come along and change the way we do things. But in general, things happen now and then in small steps. People are building upon other people's works to create new work and new things. And this is evolution. And this is sort of what's changing our way of doing whatever we're doing, living. So if you want to be a revolutionary, you have to be evolutionary. You have to build upon other people's work in order to actually succeed. You cannot just come up with something out of a vacuum. If you do that, you're amazing, but you're not living in a vacuum. You know that what people are doing around you, and you know that you can build upon their things, and you should embrace that. Thank you.